Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to our today's first story. I'm going to be deliberately vague about places and exact dates, for reasons that will be apparent shortly. Any dialogue is to the best of my memory and probably sounds a lot cleverer than it was, but isn't that always how one remembers these things? Background: this was back in the 1990s. I had recently been medically retired from the military and was attending college in Texas. My wife was working in her chosen field, while I did my level best to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Anyway, one day I left the campus, going around the backside to avoid the traffic. I was heading over to pick my wife up for lunch and ended up sitting behind another car at a stop sign. The car in front of me was a brand new Chevy, one of their little sexy models. The actual trade name escapes me at the moment, in candy apple red, being driven by a fairly new blonde, also a little sexy model, whose name will also slip by unuttered. I sat, an old sailor in an old pickup, just listening to the radio and thinking about lunch when the Chevy drove into the intersection, and then stopped. I didn't think anything of it, so I hadn't done more than put my hand on the gear shift in preparation for pulling up, when suddenly, with a suitable squeal of the tire, the Chevy shot back at me. I slapped the shift into reverse but was too late. The little Chevy smashed into the front of my truck, doing around 25 to 30 miles per hour. After a second, I cut my engine, got out of the cab, and walked around to the front of my truck. The good news was that I could see that I wasn't going to have to worry about that loose belt squeal anymore. The bad news is that the front of my little pickup was pretty much totaled. Grill drove back into the radiator, water all over the pavement, and headlights smashed. I bent down and noted that there seemed to be oil leaking as well. With a sigh of total incomprehension, I walked further up to the passenger door of the little red Chevy and its blonde driver. I was pissed, but not enraged. I guess I was still trying to figure out exactly what had happened, and why she'd ended up stopping in mid-turn and putting it in reverse like that. I looked through the tinted window and she was on the phone, talking agitatedly to someone. With all the cell phone silliness I'd seen since leaving the military, seeing her yapping on one didn't surprise me. Although, had I thought about it, I should have wondered who, exactly, she was calling. Instead, I tapped on the window and she turned a bland face to me, then screamed into the phone, loud enough to penetrate the glass, "Oh my God, he's got a tire iron." Naturally, I spun around and looked behind me, then the nickel dropped. I turned in a slow circle and noted that there were no businesses, houses, or apartments in view, nor was anyone on the sidewalks or walking down the roads. For that matter, the only traffic was several blocks away in any direction. Her little car was sitting at the stop sign, almost exactly where it had been when I pulled in behind her. I stepped back and looked at our vehicles. Yep, it looked for all the world as if I'd rear-ended her. Damn, the little bitch had set me up. I quickly walked back to my truck, thinking as fast as I could. Any minute now, a police car was going to show up, called by the little blonde, expecting to find a crazed man with a tire iron, and I dearly needed to not be that man. I pulled my tire iron out from behind my seat and threw it as far as I could into the nearby field, then jumped into my truck. It was a slim chance, but it was the only hope I had. I made sure the truck was in reverse, then belted myself in, slammed my face into the steering wheel, opened my door and heard sirens not too far away, and half slumped out the open door at an uncomfortable angle. I went limp just as the police car screeched to a halt. I ignored the policeman screaming at me to get out of the truck, trusting that my limp body would not move him to open fire. He finally edged his way over, noticed the bloody nose, tugged at an eyelid. I made sure my eye was well rolled up, and let me drop back into position. I stayed limp while he checked on the blonde, who was near hysterical with fright over the lunatic with the tire iron. Until she saw me, that is. I'd hoped that her rearview mirror was as off as it looked, or that she'd be too involved with concocting her own story to notice what I was doing. At seeing my body hanging limply below the driver's door of my truck, she stammered to a halt. The second set of sirens had been getting closer and the policeman told the now silent blonde to stay in her car. A few seconds later, someone cut me out of my seatbelt and laid me on the ground. A competent set of hands checked my vitals, and, within a few seconds, a harsh and demanding smell flooded my clotting nose. I fought it for a few seconds and made a pretty good display of a man coming around after having been knocked out. I immediately made to throw myself to the side. then stopped, half being restrained and a half staring wildly around to see what had happened. The medic sat back when I sat up, looked at the front end of my truck, and moaned, "What the fuck did that idiot do to my truck?" He told me to lie back down and started asking me professional questions about where I hurt, and if could I feel my toes and all that crap. Every few seconds, I'd look back at the wreck and mutter about the idiot backing up like that, and what the hell had he been smoking, little bits of angry stuff. The policeman, having gotten the blonde's statement, walked over and asked me if I felt up to talking. I said I felt fine, just a little sore. The medic okayed it and helped me to my feet. I gave the officer my license and proof of insurance and included my retired military ID card, then sat on my front seat and, as if I just noticed it, asked what had happened to my seatbelt. He explained that I had to be cut out of it and I shrugged. Just another item for his insurance company to pay for, I guess. What the hell was his story, officer? Why did he back up that way? The policeman looked sharply at me and asked me what I meant. I described exactly what had happened but concealed the fact that I knew that it was a female driving the Chevy, and kept referring to her as him. After I got done and he'd finished writing it all down, he asked if I had any proof. Proof? What do you mean, proof? I frowned at him, then let my jaw drop a bit. Hey, wait a minute, you ain't telling me that idiot is saying that I did this, are you? He admitted that the other driver's story that I'd rear-ended her, not him, and then threatened her with a tire iron. I frowned again and informed him that I didn't have a tire iron, that it was sitting in the garage of my house, a couple of hours away. I moved aside as he searched the cab of my truck, and caught a lucky break when he noticed, without my having to point it out to him, that my truck was still in reverse. He got out of my cab, frowning, then asked me to stay where I was and walked up to the Chevy. He then asked the blonde to step out of her car and, when she'd done so, leaned into the open driver's side door. After a few seconds, he stood back up and asked the girl to repeat her statement of what happened. It was a marvelously teary bit of acting, but she almost blew it by being somewhat puzzled when he didn't react. Instead, he asked her to go on and describe everything that had happened after the accident and everything she'd done then. She backed down from the tire iron story, saying that it might have simply been a reflection on her window, but insisting that I'd at least beaten on her window, and that I'd simply been putting on an act for my own benefit. The policeman looked over at the medic, who slowly shook his head. Years of doing search and rescue might not have done much good for me, physically, but I sure as hell know what an unconscious man acts like. The policeman then asked her if she'd tried to drive away or if she immediately shut off her engine. She said that the engine had died and, no matter what lies I'd said, that she'd never tried to leave the scene of the accident. The policeman nodded once and asked the medic to step over. He then asked the medic to sit in the Chevy and confirm that it was in reverse. I love smart people. I didn't even have to suggest he checks. When I last saw the little blonde, she was honestly crying. She was also handcuffed and driven away, arrested for making a false police report, some legal mumbo-jumbo about trying to run a con, and, my favorite part, assault and battery. Once she'd realized that she'd blown it, about the same instant she was handcuffed, she started weeping and explaining that she didn't have the money for the payments on the car, and that her only option was to fake an accident, but that I'd been faking, too, and hadn't been injured. You gotta believe me. She wouldn't lie about that. I signed my name to an almost letter-perfect statement of events over at the police station, being careful to never mention in my statement how my nose got banged up, or how I'd ended up unconscious and hanging out of the door. The arresting officer's report, as well as the EMTs, had already noted that it appeared that I'd either been partially ejected by the impact, or might have been trying to get out of the truck at the last moment. I've always believed that one should never sign one's name to a false statement. Wisest, in the long run, don't ya think? Turned out that her car insurance was good, however, and they paid for my little pickup's repair. The damage wasn't as bad as it originally looked, thank God. A little front-end work, a new radiator and assorted other dinged or dented gizmos, a little cosmetic surgery to make her outside look right once more. Hell, the mechanic is even going to toss in a full overhaul, including fixing that damn fan belt. I had to drive a loaner for the next week, also care of the blonde's insurance, and the irony of this will make you laugh, it was a little red Chevy. Nice car, and my wife and I had a ball riding in it, but way too expensive for a guy like me to drive every day. Hell, a car that nice might have made me try something stupid to make the payments. Now, here is the end of our first story, and I hope you guys are enjoying my content. So before moving to the final story, you can share your thought in the comments section about the witch, who got a full plan to get OP arrested under false allegations, but OP's intelligence saved him. Also hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more satisfying revenge stories. Moving to our final story. This happened in 2015. At the time, I was 20 and started taking my first steps into the real world of being an adult. I got my first job and bought my first used car. My commute took me through the 57 to 60 interchange, also known as the worst bottleneck in California at the time and the 8th worst in the US. For those not from around here, those two freeways merge for about a mile and a half, then they split into two freeways again. Everyone on the 57 always wants to get on the 60 and vice versa. The result is a clusterfuck of lane merges for a little over a minute, with everyone moving at 60 to 70 mph. And, of course, there's always that one asshole who realizes he got in the wrong lane and needs to cut over all the lanes on the freeway to do so. I had gotten my first used car the day before. I was borrowing my dad's spare car before this point, but this was my first car in my name. My mom took some pictures of it before I left for work. Once I got to that interchange, a motorcycle gang started splitting lanes on either side of me, easily 15 to 20 of them, and it felt like they weren't going to stop coming. One of them decided to switch lanes and cut off the car in front of me. They braked hard, I braked hard, the girl behind me on her phone didn't brake as hard. She rear-ended my new car, the dude behind her rear-ended her. I had no idea what to do. It was my first time in an accident, so I pulled over as much as I could to the shoulder, which was barely existent. A tow truck driver saw the accident and called highway patrol for us, and I got the name and insurance details of the girl who hit me. The dude behind her stopped initially, but when I tried to get his details as well, he said this car is a rental, and left the scene without giving me any info. The girl's PT Cruiser was totaled. My car had some scuffed paint and a large dent in the rear bumper, which I later found out extended to the metal spare tire holder. I waited around for the gruff highway patrol officer to show up, who had very little patience with me. I didn't even know what the lane numbers were and chastised both of us for letting the guy in the rental leave. My dad helped me file a claim through his insurance company, since I hadn't even gotten insurance set up yet, due to having the car for not even 24 hours in all. The police report said the girl was at fault. My dad's insurance contacted the girl's insurance XZ. I got my car inspected at the place XZ told me to go. It came out to $800 and XZ cut me a check for $800. I cashed the check, waited for it to clear, bought a new computer with the money, and everyone was happy. Or so I thought. I got a call while I was at work from the dad of the girl who hit me, a series of calls. The dad claimed that the damage to my car was pre-existing, and says he asked XZ not to pay me since he didn't think it was that badly damaged. I laughed it off. If the person at fault in an accident could just say, "Oh, I don't want to raise my rates. Don't pay out," then there wouldn't be a need for insurance. It was just idle, empty threats from someone who suddenly saw their rates spike. Then I was buying lunch a couple of days later and my card was declined. It was crazy. My card shouldn't have been declined, since I'm very good about keeping on top of all that. I checked my bank account, and I had minus $600. I wasn't sure what happened at first, but then I saw that XZ took the $800 check out of my bank account without notifying me, because the dad disputed it and they believed him despite the photographic evidence I gave of the car being pristine before the accident. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any money for gas or food. I called XZ and they told me to duck off, and that I needed to take them to court if I disagreed. My dad was in the middle of a small claims suit against his former employer at the time, so I asked him about how lawyers worked, and my dad had his lawyer look into it for me. Turns out that what XZ Insurance did to me, giving me money, letting it settle, then taking it back, was illegal and equivalent to knowingly writing a bad check, with some pretty stiff penalties and fees. The lawyer mailed the letter, and within days I got a call from the local XZ branch apologizing and trying to settle to avoid a lawsuit. They cut me a deal. They would give me $1,600 if I agreed to drop everything and not sue them. So I agreed, and the very next morning I had a XZ Insurance truck show up at my doorstep to drop off a $1,600 check. I wish I knew if they went after the girl's dad or not. That's as much as I know about the story. To this day I refuse to even consider XZ Insurance after that bullshit. But at least I came out of it $1,600 richer. Now, here is the end of our today's video, and I hope you enjoyed this malicious compliance. Guys, I want to hear your thought about this story in the comments section, and if you had similar encounter with such fraudster insurance company, please share it. And before you leave, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to remain updated on more fantastic stories.